Hi, everybody, and I'm really grateful to be with you. Um, I graduated in 1987. I majored in political science and German studies, so it was a double major. And currently, I am a judge in the Circuit Court of Cook County, and I hear criminal cases here in Chicago.
Great, thank you. And let's go to Naomi next.
Okay. Hi, I am probably the oldest one here. I graduated CAS in 1981. I was also a double major like Erica with a language, so poli-sci with a French major. I know you students now all have quadruple majors and stuff, but back in those days, we did not have people like that, so we were the forerunners back then. I'm actually retired right now. I came back from overseas a couple months ago, but before, and I do a little bit of teaching at a law school for international human rights. But during my career, I was a lawyer, a corporate lawyer, a federal prosecutor, and then an international human trafficking lawyer and immigration asylum law professor. But now I'm just at home and taking it easy.
Great, thanks, Naomi. And we'll go to Amy next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thrilled to have you here and have a chance to meet you in this way. I graduated in 1986 with an English major. Back then, the English majors had to choose a minor concentration. My minor concentration was Russian literature, but in English translated. And I'm now an associate professor of social work at the University of Minnesota in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Great, thanks, Amy. And we'll start with you with our first question. What were some of the impactful classes or experiences for you in school that led you to consider and also pursue your chosen field?
Surprisingly enough, I can come up with one example from the classroom as an English major, and I can come up with one example from student life at Northwestern. And let's start with the student life. So as a sophomore, I was a health aide, and what that meant then is I was a volunteer who got training every Wednesday afternoon at the student health center, and then in the dorm in Elder Hall, I was like a go-to person if a student was ill. And I had a kit of medicines, over-the-counter medicines, and also could triage and know when to call 911 and stuff like that. So I was a health aide as a sophomore. I was an RA as a junior and a senior. And in those roles, what those roles really did for me is they gave me this first inkling that in the future, one day, I would become a social worker because I loved those roles. I also absolutely loved Northwestern. I loved being on campus. I loved being in a college environment. And that in many ways predicted that ultimately I ended up working at a university. And I worked in corporate America. I did all kinds of different things. I've never been happier than being employed by a university. Now, one quick thing about, I realize time is limited, I have so much to say. One quick thing about the way the English major classroom inspired me is I had teachers. I would never raise my hand in class. I didn't think anything I had to say was valuable back then, but sometimes the teachers had mechanisms where they'd get us to write out our thoughts, and sometimes the teachers would read out my thoughts. And that made me realize, wow, my teacher actually thought that what I was thinking was valuable. And that sort of gave me some self-esteem to grow on. I pass.
That's great. Thanks, Amy. And Naomi, what about you with those important experiences and classes?
Well, I know Cassie knows this already, but my biggest influential factor was the fact that I flunked my French placement exam when I first started Northwestern in 1977. I came from Canada and I thought I was fluent, but for some reason I flunked it and was placed in the last quarter of French. It changed my life. The Professor Robinson said, you know what, stay in this class, relax, get an easy A because you're so new and you're so young and nervous. And then go to France for your junior year abroad. So I did that, and it changed my life because I knew I always wanted to be a lawyer, but having French under my belt opened up French Africa and French Indochina, and that's where I was sent later on to start international human rights work and be involved with all these other things. And then it did actually give me a hook to be able to do like the mainstream corporate work and the criminal work too, because the language will really set you apart. And my son, who's there now, I've encouraged him minor in Chinese, and so he's doing that too.
That's great. Thanks, Naomi. And Erica, how about you?
Well, two experiences, one that is directly responsible for what I do today, strangely enough. I went to Northwestern with a view toward, I was interested in foreign affairs and diplomatics. It was the most beyond conception thing I could do coming from my background. But when I took my language placement test, Naomi, I tested out of German because I had so much in high school advanced placement. So that put me further along toward majoring in it, and that's part of why I did major in it. But a singular sociology class completely changed my entire course. It was a Professor Sampson. And I just remember a class when he gave the personal example of how he was a tenured professor at Northwestern. He drove a particular kind of car, I think it was like a Mercedes or something. And he talked about how he was routinely pulled over and made to put his hands on the car and harassed about having it. And I was so blown away by that personal accounting together with everything else I learned in that class. I decided that I was going to law school, that I was going to represent the indigent, no matter whether it was in civil cases or criminal or both. And that's what I ultimately wound up doing. I was a public defender for 20 years before I actually became a judge.
Great, Erica. And we'll start with you with this next question we have. Tell us about those first few jobs, your first job or your first few jobs after college or after law school, however you want to interpret that, and whether it was exactly what you were looking for. Knowing that we have students who right now in college who may be shifting their plans due to the current economic situation. If this wasn't your plan A, can you talk about how you strategized from there?
It was an entirely different time. So I'm fully aware that the multitude of opportunities, it seems, that were available to me at the time when I completed Northwestern and between Northwestern and law school, I worked for United Cerebral Palsy services over the summer to earn money to be able to pay for housing in law school. And it was a great job. It was really amazing, right in the wheelhouse of things that interest me. And so I really enjoyed it. And I felt bad. They offered me a full-time position because happily they were happy with my work too. But I was so excited about law school. I was able to get a scholarship to law school, a full scholarship to pay for the schooling, but I was responsible for my housing. So that first job was to do that. And then immediately after law school, I did interview with law firms. Some were like, hey, would you give us a shot? We're interested. But I was singular in my focus. And so I only chose to interview with agencies that provided legal services to indigent communities. And I interviewed with the Public Defender's Office and with the civil equivalent of that office and Legal Assistance Foundation, in essence. And the Public Defender's Office offered me a position, and that's where I started and remained until the set of circumstances that propelled me to a judgeship.
Great. That's great. Thanks, Erica. And Naomi, how about you?
Oh, Erica, you put me to shame. It's okay. It's good. There are different routes to getting where we need to be. I was a daughter of Asian family, so my career options were doctor or lawyer, make money. So out of law school, I went for the big bucks, not only because I wanted to be rich and financially stable, but because I had so many student loans. I had so much. And so I, went with some big private law firms for the first few years out of school. It was not very rewarding. I learned a little bit of things here and there, basic litigation skills. Then I went to be a federal prosecutor at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. And I think that really formed a lot of my skills, because I really didn't have any practical skills, because law school is so theoretical. So it was just trial by fire to learn how to be in court and be a lawyer. Back then, I think I'm dating myself, but LA law was really big. And Susan Day was my favorite prosecutor, so I wanted to be like her. So I went and, tried cases and did things like that. But after I finished a case where this poor guy, under the federal sentencing guidelines, which was horrendously discriminatory back then, went away for a period of time that I thought was so unfair, I just started crying in the courtroom. And then the judge called me up and said, you know what? I don't think you're cut out for this. Maybe you better think about doing something else. And then I started switching into more human rights thing, and went overseas and started doing more rule of law work. And I found that my criminal law background, those skills, and even the litigation background from the law firm really helped me to become, a litigator against corporate greed, for, litigating on behalf of human trafficking victims, forced labor victims, and use my skills later to do really asylum work, which has been my concentration over the last few years. But I did not start off with such a sweet, pure, altruistic mind, but, I think God uses that later to change us, and we have to grow and learn. So there's many different ways. So anyway.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. That's great, Naomi, and great stories to hear. And Amy, how about you with your first job?
Well, when I graduated with my English major, I thought what I wanted to do was something that would be very, that would look very impressive to other people. So I wasn't really looking within to see what would suit me or what my skills would be best served for. I wanted to do something that would impress my relatives, that people would think was prestigious. So I thought the highest I could reach in terms of that kind of job, I thought, I want to work in advertising. I want to work for an advertising agency on Madison Avenue in New York City, and that's going to impress everyone. And let me tell you that I worked on the Kentucky Fried Chicken account, and if that impresses you, then I met my aims. But my journey to becoming a professor of social work was very, very circuitous, and there were many deviations. So anyway, to get back to the question at hand, my first job was as a production assistant in a very small, very kind of corrupt, rotten advertising agency in New York City. And I persisted in that career for, I guess, a couple of years before moving more into social work. Maybe I'll say that much for now.
Yeah, that's great, Amy. And coming back to you with this next question, and it's interesting, I know you mentioned graduating with an English degree. What has surprised you about what you learned or did in school that helps you in your work today? And how do you see your arts and science background playing out in your career?
Well, I do research now. I became a social scientist and a research scientist, which was an identity that I didn't have for a lot of years, even into my adult and professional life. So I had to experience a transformation into adopting that new identity. But as a researcher, I do what's called qualitative research. I do quantitative research as well, but qualitative research involves examining and studying texts, most notably interviews with research participants, and studying those texts for the person's intended meaning and interpreting that text. And that's exactly what I did day in, day out in my English major. So it helped me very directly in my career right now. Although in all the different careers I had over 30 years in different jobs, it didn't play quite as prominently, but right now it really is very prominent. So.
Yeah, that's great. Great correlation between the two, and very specific, which is great. And Naomi, how about you with what surprised you that you use now, and how do you see your arts and science background playing out in your work?
I'm really surprised at the way foreign language has really affected my career. It's guided me to different parts of the world where I've needed French as an underlying basis in order to teach law or practice law or do rule of law. And the other thing too is that since I have a foreign language, it made it more exposed to going to other countries where I have to pick up other languages because it's already something that I'm used to doing, like other, Cambodian or Chinese and things like that. So I think the language part opened up my mind in terms of that part of my brain, which wasn't really developed. And then in terms of my poli-sci background, my last professor was Professor Payton. He is very well written in the area of African politics. And my last thesis was discrimination against from the colonialists in comparing the two, Senegal with the French and then Kenya with the Britain, and how they treated the local people. And that just really opened my eyes. I've never thought about those things before. And I think I just kind of buried that. And then later on, that whole theme of discrimination, which has been part of my litigation practice when I was in private practice, like employment discrimination on the basis of all these different factors, really kind of planted a seed for me. So I guess in those indirect ways, you never see while you're there at Northwestern what that might lead to, but I think everything will eventually be used in the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great, Naomi. A direct way from Amy, an indirect way from you. Very interesting. And Erica, how about you? How do you see, or what has surprised you about what you still use from what you learned in college?
I think it's a combination of the practical as well as sort of the more, it's hard to nail down, but the hard to nail down point, I think, is, I can only describe it as like an expectation of excellence. I did not fully understand what it meant to be able to go to Northwestern at the time I was able to attend. I came to learn, but I was completely unfamiliar. I'm the first person in my family to go to college, and came from a broken home situation. And so that whole expectation of excellence, um, it I became aware, and it's something that has shockingly been everywhere I go. When the fact that I went to Northwestern comes out, they're like, oh, well, that's why, but I like it. I really appreciate that other people understand what it means to be someone who was blessed enough to go to a place like Northwestern. So that has both surprised me but enriched me in ways I cannot tell you. And probably the more practical things are just the plain work ethic. I shouldn't tell you all this, but I was assigned to do an independent study for a whole semester, and I did not spend the semester doing it. I spent a weekend before it was due doing it. But all of what I'd done before, the research, how you consume massive amounts of material and analyze it, and that all just came rushing in, and I actually pulled an A- for that independent research. But the professor said, it would have been an A, but there were just so many mistakes in it. We didn't have computers back then, when dinosaurs roamed the earth. So a combination of just all of the work ethic, the excellence, how we are exposed to statistics through the political science degree, understanding geopolitical ramifications, the whole just morass of wonder that I was exposed to, and the work ethic required to and not only take it in, but then do something with it. And then going forward, just the incredible legacy of excellence that follows the school.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great, Erica. And coming back to you with this next two-pronged question about networking. Networking is always a little tricky as a young professional. And now we have students who are trying to network with alumni who are also working through the global pandemic and a whole new way of work. And so I'm curious if you can share a little bit of advice for how students can go about networking right now in your industry. And then, talking about COVID-19, if there are any other ways your work or industry have shifted that you'd like to share with the students today that you think may be impacting your industry for the long haul?
Sure. Clearly, forums like these are invaluable. Just bringing together people who are in school with people who are beyond and actually performing, that's just, I cannot really laud that enough as an opportunity. But particularly for my field, for the law, there are lots of bar associations. So in Chicago, there's Chicago Bar Association, there's the Illinois State Bar Association, the Women's Bar Association. There are very many different entities of bar associations, which are just areas where lawyers come together. And even while we're in this time, they are still meeting, they are still active. There are Zoom meetings, there are subcategories. And so if you have a particular area of interest, finding the specialty areas within the bar associations is a wonderful way to connect and link. And many of the bar associations have student rates and fees that are available for people who are just curious and looking. That applies for the whole lawyer aspect. For becoming a judge, I think at this stage, there is so much, more to go through to get to that point. But familiarizing yourself with the work that judges do. Right now in Illinois, and in Cook County in particular, we now have a YouTube channel where we are streaming live in this truncated way while COVID-19 issues abound. Beginning June 1st, we're going to start back opening all the courtrooms. All people will be permitted to come into court, but there'll be social distancing. It'll be limited as to whom. The number of cases we're hearing is very limited. So there are many measures going on or taking effect now to try to deal with this issue. But please know that vehicles to get into the law and talking to people who are lawyers who can help guide you if you're thinking about law school, there are things available through, and a big on-ramp is through the bar associations.
That's great. That's really helpful, Erica. Thank you for sharing. And Naomi, we'd love to hear a little bit more from you about your advice for networking and how your world has shifted with the current situation.
Yes, I thought Erica's ideas were really good, all about the bar associations and those different areas. Really, really excellent ideas to do that. I think the only thing I could add for me, because I'm in a different field, I don't know how many of you are interested in human rights or even the field of asylum and refugee law. It came to a highlight at about 2015 when we had all the children at the border. But to do an asylum case, people don't know this, you don't really need to be a lawyer. You can actually help somebody if you just know enough Spanish and you can go through things. But I would say find a nonprofit organization if you're interested and try to help with doing an asylum case. There are a whole bunch of primers and manuals and videos online, and you can learn the basics of it and then find somebody that can help you through it. And I say this even if you're not interested in doing asylum law in the future, because number one, it's an excellent pro bono thing that you can do. You can save someone's life right now. You don't know what you're sending them back home to. And then number two, if you want to be a hotshot corporate litigator, criminal litigator, those skills of advocacy to learn how to present a case, go into an interview at the agency level, take it to court if you're denied and do it in front of the immigration judge. It's a really great way not only to network with the judges there and also the trial assistants and the ICE, and then also with other lawyers that you might be working with at immigration, but also to be able to get those practical skills and then also to do a good thing, do a good deed and help somebody in the meantime. So I would say that would be my practical advice for doing those two things. My world has really not changed. I'm teaching a human rights class at a law school right now for LLM students, and it just shifted naturally online. So it hasn't really affected my teaching, since actually I find it's kind of fun to do it online. So it hasn't really affected me that much, but I do know that once it all lifts, there's going to be all those people stuck in the shelters and stuff, and they will need help. So perhaps you can start reaching out now if you're interested in thinking about just kind of even read the primers and see what it is, whether it's something you'd be interested in. Because I think for me as a law professor, former law professor, that if you can do an asylum case, you can do any other kind of case.
That's great. Thanks, Naomi, for sharing. Really helpful. And Amy, how about you with the advice for networking and how this has impacted your work?
My best advice for networking is the old book, What Color is Your Parachute? There is a 2020 version, and it teaches you a skill called the informational interview, where you just ask someone for 20 minutes of their time, and it's an informational interview. You're just talking to them to learn more. And the book spells out exactly how you use these informational interviews to say to them, well, who else do you think I should talk to? And before you know it, you use this networking pattern to get exactly where you want to go in life, in whatever direction that is. We went online with teaching at the university, and my research study is about to go online, and we're going to recruit participants online and treat them with addiction intervention online. But what I want to say to you is a sort of a secret, which is graduate schools and universities are trembling in their boots right now because they're going to become very tuition dependent with the financial devastation of COVID-19. I don't think there's ever been an easier time to get accepted into graduate school. We want our students to enroll and show up in school, even though it might be online education. So I don't know that that's ever been an easier time, and universities have never been more thrilled to see you at their doorstep for graduate school. Cassie, can I say 2 other really quick things that are off the topic? Okay. Number one, when I was an undergraduate at Northwestern, at Norris Center, they had the alumni panel. And they said, if you're only to go there if you're a senior. Well, I snuck in as a junior because I was so worried about my future. And I listened to the esteemed alumni on the panel. And they terrified me because they were so accomplished and they had done so much. And I thought, I'll never get there. And it really cost me an incredible amount of pain to attend that. I shouldn't have attended. I was only a junior, but I just want to say for people who feel that way, hearing us, listen to us, a judge, a tenured professor, Naomi's incredible experience. There were years in the past 30, 35 years when if NU alumni invited me to be on a panel, I would have said, hello, I'm Amy, I'm a graduate and I'm a waitress. Or hello, I'm Amy, I'm a babysitter. Esteemed Northwestern alum, I'm a babysitter, or I worked in a factory sewing curtains, which I did. Or I'm a summer camp counselor. There were times in my career when you're seeing me sort of at my best. And there were times when I was kind of like, doing all kinds of different things. So it doesn't look this good always, as you're even, even this picture behind me, it's like a metaphor. It's covering up other things I don't want you to see. And that's true of just even this, seeing me at this moment in time is not representative of what happened to me after I graduated. So I also want to tell you, when Erica was talking about Northwestern, I started to get tears in my eyes. I so love my alma mater, my nurturing mother. And if you know the Peter Gabriel song, In Your Eyes, whenever I hear it, I think of Northwestern. And it's the eyes of Northwestern that I see are in your eyes when I hear that song. And every time I hear that song, I imagine myself walking on the Lakeville. That's me, over and out.
Yeah, Amy, that's great. And thinking about yourself walking along the Lakeville, what do you wish you could tell yourself when you were in these students' shoes?
I would say, don't worry. I know it seems super scary about life after Northwestern, but just listen to yourself, listen to your heart, listen to your yearnings of your heart and follow those. Do what you can in the light that you have, like follow that yearning of your heart. Take that next step in that direction, and then the light will appear to tell you to go to the next direction after that. Don't forget, Northwestern does not have a social work degree. In my family, there were never any social workers. There were never any college professors in my family. And the only models I had were what was offered by Northwestern and what I saw in my family. And none of that really modeled for me what I ended up doing. I had to find my own path forward. And so that I think is the key.
Thanks, Amy. And Naomi, before we get into your advice for yourself when you were in your shoes, for students that are on the call, this is our last question before jumping into your questions. We have a few that have come through, so feel free to keep sending those in as we hear the last bits of advice from these alumni. So Naomi, please take it away.
I guess when I look back at Northwestern, I wish I had been more adventurous. You know, my mom said poli-sci, so I said, "Oh, I'll do a little French," but that was as adventurous as I got. Looking back, I wish I had taken some classes at Medill School of Journalism. I wish I had kind of explored a little bit of that and just kind of let my mind wander. And like my son, he's going to be graduating next year. And when I talked to him yesterday, and he goes, and up until now, he's a computer science major, and he's got a job with a big company in California, and he's ready to go. And suddenly he writes me, he calls me yesterday, he says, "Mom, you know, maybe I want to go into music instead, you know?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he goes, "Maybe I want to graduate a little earlier, not to do this other double major." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Or maybe I want to do another one. I said, "Okay, can I take some time off?" Like, okay, I would never have been able to ask my mom that and never even thought about it. But I'd say, you know, just be open to, kind of, it sounds kind of corny, but what your heart is telling you. Don't have these regrets later on and say, "Oh, I wish I had taken this class," but explore what you want to do at that time. And Northwestern has so many amazing things. There's a great music school, theater school. These things are so different from what we go in as. And then even on the practical side, I went into law school with a poli-sci degree, but I found that the people who actually did the best at my law school was a nurse and a musician. It was people who did things that you would never think about doing, you know, so just be a little adventurous and just try something that might feel a little bit uncomfortable to you. And I wish I had done that years ago. I'm just starting to learn now, but I wish I had done that a little bit. But other than that, I'm very grateful to Northwestern for the basic skills and my friends who are still around. We had our 40th year reunion for our junior year abroad group 2 weeks ago, and you know, everyone's still blabbing away in French and talking about going out to the nightclubs back then. So, you know, I think these memories that you can create are really so valuable and so wonderful.
That's great. Thanks, Naomi. And Erica, last bits of advice for what you wish you could tell yourself when you were in these students' shoes.
To continue to trust yourself and to know that it's not always going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination, but when you believe that you have found the thing or things that ignite your own passion, your own sense of purpose, that you apply like you go after it with a passion and an energy like nothing else. I also share with Naomi the thought like, "Oh, I wish I had done more." But then when I look back on all that I was able to do at Northwestern, the study abroad just for a summer, because I did win a scholarship to study in Germany for a year when I was graduating Northwestern, but for the Regensburg program, but the law school said they could only hold my spot in law school, not my scholarship. So I'm like, "Oh, auf Wiedersehen." So I went to law school and I haven't looked back, loved it. But there were many bumps along the road, but Northwestern was just such an overall enriching, amazing experience. I was a flag twirler during the marching band. I got to be an RA and then an RHC and studying abroad, you know, going abroad with other friends. Like I felt like I just, you know, just drank in as much as I could because I came from a circumstance that really under-resourced area, single parent home, et cetera, et cetera. But I just like ran with both arms open and I got to meet amazing people like Amy Mamo Krentzman. So I would say to just continue to trust yourself, but then to not be afraid to pour all your energy into what you believe is your calling, your purpose. And so I will just share briefly this. Although I became pretty convinced about the work I wanted to do, and then, you know, we used to say, procrastinate, go grad. For me, that meant law school. And so I did go to law school. It was an amazing thing. But afterward, because of what I chose to do, it was really tough. Like Mamo, I wanted to impress my family. Nobody was impressed that I was becoming a public defender after finishing law school. They were all pretty upset with me. And but I persisted, and even through I had this god-awful experience of homelessness for 4 days while I was studying for the bar. I had moved from Cincinnati to back to Chicago, and things went awry, and I found myself homeless for 4 days in this city. And even in the face of that, not only did I not tell my family, but there was no way I was going to give up and go back to Ohio. And so I persisted, and it's a bizarre thing to say, but where I am in all of what's happened has just been part of this process that's just brought me to a really amazing place. So, Amy, I totally agree with you that on different parts of the journey, if I were asked what I was doing, it would be quite the story. So trust yourself and don't be afraid to put all your energy into what you believe is your purpose.
That's great, Erica. And thank you all for sharing such great bits of advice and stories. And we do have some questions from students coming in, so we'll start taking those. Our first question from Claudia is about law school, but I also think, Amy, we could address this with taking a break before school, like going to school for social work. But her question is, what advice do you have for graduating seniors hoping to do law school in 1 to 2 years who are having difficulty finding a job for those gap years? They're very nervous about how this crisis may impact the law school applications. And Erica, maybe we can start with you and work our way down. Oh, and you're muted still.
Thank you. The market is tough, but things are changing a little different because of the COVID-19 situation. So as far as positions or places where you can seek employment, if you have a thought toward law school, I will say that Northwestern was amazing for me. And they found, because we are on quarters and we would get out after everyone else, lots of the jobs would be taken. And so I got this amazing job at one law firm, Isham, Lincoln and Beal. The Lincoln is the grandson of Abraham Lincoln. Unfortunately, the firm is now defunct. But so that was one entree. The school's resources led me to certain places. Short of that, there are other resources, like there is a legal paper here in Chicago called the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin. There is an electronic version of it, and they have a section where they list job opportunities. So that's one resource that's available. And then at this moment, I don't know of paid positions that are available, but there sometimes are. If you go on the local governmental website of a particular jurisdiction, so for Chicago, it's Cook County. The Cook County government website will have job listings that are available as well. Also, the city of Chicago has its separate website with listings for any job opportunities. So I think the translation for that is when you go to other jurisdictions, look for governmental websites, which that will list their job opportunities in their areas, both county and city, local wise. So those are other areas where you may comb and look for any job opportunities.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Erica. Thanks for those tips. And Naomi, we'll go to you next and see if you have any other ideas for these students who are worried about law school applications in these gap years.
Okay. I'm trying to think of something, so not to repeat. I guess a couple things. I did not do a gap year before I went to law school. I kind of wish I had, because when I went to law school, I found the half that had gone through, had a gap year, were so much more mature than me and much more calm than I was. And I felt like I was a little bit more stressed. So if you do a gap year, I think that would be a good idea. I think either way is good. I made it through, but I think both of them are good options. In terms of if you do a gap year, if you're waiting until you get into law school, I know that my law school loans kept me in debt until I was about 40. And it was really, really hard. I couldn't get into public interest law until that time. So one thing I would say is don't always go for the big name schools because they're so expensive, and sometimes it's really not worth the value. And I did teach at 3 law schools and before I went overseas, and they're not the top tier, but man, I'm in Texas right now, but we really prepared the heck out of our students, and they all ended up just fine. I mean, they did really wonderfully, and their tuition was not like the big name law school. So I think that's one practical thing if you feel like you want to go to law school. And then practically, if you are going to law school, you can either, go to law school during the day or go to a law school that has night school. I know a lot of them are becoming more like that, so that you can get a job as a law clerk or even as a waitress or something during the day or the night, and then go to law school if you're going to finance your way through that way. And then another way some people were doing who really want to be human rights lawyers, right away, where they would go and volunteer at, KIND, like Kids in Need of Defense or Catholic Charities or one of these pro bono asylum immigration clinics, or even my law school had immigration and asylum clinics. And then at night, just take a job like waitressing or bartending and then make your ends meet. So there are different ways, but I think that one thing I'm telling my kids is, as if they're thinking about graduate school, be really careful about just signing on the dotted line for those loans, because it's really, it's so hard on you later on. So just there are other ways to get through this process. But if you're, there are all different situations that you'll all be facing. But if you ever want to talk about it, feel free to give me a call or an email.
That's great, Naomi, and I'll definitely share out emails after the session so students can follow up with further questions. And Amy, I'd love to come to you.
I'm sorry, can I just say
yeah.
one thing about the law school debt? In Illinois, and I suspect it's available in other jurisdictions, if you work for 10 years in public interest, and it varies per jurisdiction, they forgive student loans to that amount. So some people who finishing law school, if you commit to doing a public interest type position and being a public defender, counts, legal assistance foundation, humanity. For every year you work in the field, you get a certain percentage of your loans forgiven, and it can be the total amount up to 10 years here.
That's really helpful, Erica. Thank you. So this is great talking about law school and some of those tips there. And Amy, I also know I personally went to got a master's in social work, and a lot of my classmates took some time off in between, and thinking about students who might want to take, work for a few years before going into social work. What does that field look like, with the nonprofits and some of those different organizations that may be impacted pretty toughly by this pandemic?
I'm afraid to say that I think the social service employers are going to be feeling an incredible pinch in times like this, and I'm very worried about the social work job market now. What I would say, I read admissions essays for incoming MSW students, and we do like to see that the person has had some experience in social work, but we really consider volunteer work very strongly. So I would say that volunteer work would help you. We do admit students very readily from undergrad. You need a 3.0 undergrad major, and it's easy to get into an MSW program, honestly, relatively easy. And we will admit people right in from undergrad, but that gap year or years are important, because social work is something where you want to make sure that's what you want before you come to social work school. And those years can help you sort that out one way or the other. And then writing about that in your admission essay can be convincing. I just want to quickly say, Erica and I were friends. We knew each other. I got Erica on this panel today, and we were at the Course and Teacher Evaluation Council. That was our work study job. That's how we met. And then we were RAs together at Allison Hall. And we found the RA picture taken in the fall of 1985. And Cassie can show the picture maybe at the end of the hour.
Yeah, that's really special. And Amy, that's great advice. And And we have a question. So I believe Thea has a question, and she wants to turn her microphone on. So Thea, if you want to turn your mic on and ask your question, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So I had a question for Ms. Bang. And so what I was wondering about is you also, so you have like a lot of experience working on the ground where you do human rights work, but you also have written research, and that's kind of almost sociological in nature. And I was wondering, for students who are maybe conflicted about whether they want, who do want to maybe have like a more like law school based experience where you're actually in the courtroom or like helping people out, like, but they're also interested in writing and researching the kind of international and like domestic legal structures from like a more academic perspective. Like, how did you navigate those interests when you were going through higher education? Does that kind of make sense?
Are you talking about my articles now, like on human trafficking?
Yeah, sure. I am talking about those. Like,
Actually, I just started writing those back in 2015 when I got humiliated by a federal judge in court, and I thought I was so nervous in court I couldn't explain my legal theory on behalf of my trafficking victims, and I was just devastated. So I decided I would take to writing, and then it just became a hobby. And a lot of my colleagues were a little bit surprised because they say, "Oh, you know, you're churning out so many articles." But I think that if you find an area that you really love that you want to practice in, by writing and spending that time writing the law review article, which is tremendously time consuming, will make you kind of like an expert in the field in your mind, at least give you the confidence level. And then I took those articles and I sent them out to all the judges that I know would be hearing those cases, you know? And so they would kind of know who I was, and that would help me in my litigation when I filed lawsuits, and they would kind of know that I had a little bit of credibility. So I found that helped. But it's basically, you do need a lot of time to write in conjunction with doing the practical part of your practice. And the work that I did on the ground, either in the United States and overseas, you do have time. As long as you have LexisNexis and Westlaw, you just have to just devote like 3 or 4 hours each day after you finish work and just come home and do it. And then eventually it will get done. There's only 2 publication deadlines per year. So if you can just match it with your work, I think it really helped me. I never realized that it would help me until 30 years out of law school, but I think it really did help at that point in my career. I don't know if that's your question. I'm trying to see where you are.
thank you. Yeah, that helped. Thanks.
Great. And Amy, it looks like, did you want to chime in too?
Yes, just to say that if there's a professor doing work that you feel very passionate about, you could volunteer to help them, because professors always have tons of unpublished, half-written manuscripts, and they just don't have time to do it all. And they have data that's been unanalyzed. And if you step in and you're someone with excellent skills, who's very, very reliable and dependable, and you want to do hard work, you know, I'd be thrilled if such a student came to my doorstep and said to me, "Amy, how can I help you? What's in your file drawers that I can help you get published?" That would be exciting, and I'd want that student to help me.
And then to also just be aware, Thea, that when you're practicing law, depending on the type of and the area you practice within, there can be quite a bit of writing necessary as well as research. As a public defender, I did post-conviction cases where working on actual innocence. And there were many times, and what ultimately led to the whole judgeship thing was an argument. I was arguing before the Illinois Supreme Court on one of the post-conviction cases. And so the number of briefs that we had to file, the page numbers, there's quite a bit of research. So I'm also amazed by Naomi being able to publish in addition to practicing, but there is quite a bit of writing and research that you're engaged in when you're just practicing law as well, depending on the area.
Mm-hmm. That's really helpful, Erica. And while I have you here, another question came in from Mackenzie asking if you all recommend building up experiences in the one area of interest to be competitive, like in their one area of interest to be competitive, or do you recommend exploring different interests as an undergrad?
I think when you're in the learning posture, exploring as much as possible to understand what impacts you, what ignites you. It's what I share. I'm also an adjunct professor at one of our area law schools, and I'm often asked about that. And to figure out what you like, I've taught students who ultimately became prosecutors, and then I used to teach a public defender clinic at John Marshall Law School. What's important is what sparks you. We need excellent lawyers on both sides. For the system to work properly, we need excellence on both sides. So I think school is a time to expose yourself to as much as you can so that you can figure out what you do like. But once you're clear or you feel strongly following that path, I think developing the specialty is well in your interest.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And Naomi, we'll come to you next if you have any other recommendations as well.
Oh, I agree completely with Erica said. I think I have nothing to add, especially at the undergraduate stage, just do it all. But Erica did mention about clinical work at the law school level, which I think is amazing. And if you are in law school, I didn't do a law school clinic when I was at school, but I wish I had. Looking at what's available now, I think it really gets you prepared. It gives you a taste for that area of law that you might want to go into. And these days, the law schools seem to have such a variety of clinics that are available. So I think if you could do that, that would be really a wonderful experience.
Great. Thanks, Naomi. And Amy, how about you?
I also agree with what's been said, to explore all your broad and varying interests and keep it wide for now is what I would also say.
That's great. And we have a question that came through about Naomi, about the information that you spoke about asylum cases. We have students who are definitely interested and would love to know if you have more suggestions on specific organizations in the Chicago area or across the country they could look into.
Well, I'm actually located in Texas, but I have a colleague who started the Global Pro Bono Bar Association online about a year ago. And one of his first projects is to train students virtually, like all over the world, not only in the United States, law students in the field of asylum. And they have these trainings over on online and things like that. But it depends where you are, because if you're in Chicago, I'm sure Erica knows there's probably some wonderful nonprofits there. And then I know most nonprofit immigration agencies do have pro bono opportunities for asylum work specifically, even if it's just going down and doing intake. If you're interested in down in this area near the Mexico-Texas border, we have a lot of opportunities for people to go down to the border and just spend days doing intake. They set them up by computer, so you can even just come around here and do it. But especially these days, if you have Spanish background, I think definitely there would be a lot of interest in having people come in and help work those cases. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And my last question, and maybe Naomi, we'll start with you on this one. To close out, we had a question: what was the biggest or most memorable struggle you had to overcome your law career journey, or, Amy, for you, social work?
Oh, I liked it when I was in the middle, because I could kind of prepare when Amy or Erica spoke. The first time I'm on, so I'm like, oh, that's a hard one. The biggest obstacle, like in my career?
Yeah.
This is like not academic and not intellect, not professional, but I'd say if you have personal issues and emotional issues stemming from your background, family background, dysfunctional family, I mean, a lot of us have those. I think we are in denial a lot. And I looked at my career path, although I've been able to patch it up and it looks really successful on a resume. I look back and go, if I had been emotionally a little bit more healthy before I went in as a lawyer, I think I would have been a better professor to my students. I would have been better to my clients. I think I would have been more understanding, more compassionate, less judgmental. And I think that if you're at Northwestern, there's the health services there, there's Searles, there's all those places. If you want to just do some self-introspection and to see what comes up and just, work more on emotional health and well-being, I think that really would have helped me. In my culture, it was taboo back then, but my kids are all going through it. So I think it's really, it just would have been a practical advice for me to do back then, instead of having to figure it out in my 30s and my 40s and stuff like that. So it's just one, non-academic piece of advice.
Yeah, absolutely, Naomi. Such an important piece as well. So thank you for sharing. And Amy, maybe we can come to you next and see what were some of your big obstacles.
I'm really touched by Naomi's candor. Thank you so much for that answer, Naomi. And that is the truth of my story as well. And my recommendation is to tend to one's own emotional health, mental health, because if some of those obstacles can be cleared away, it opens up a whole new world. And for me, a discovery I made was the ways in which alcoholism was affecting my family. And I recommend to everyone on the call to learn something about alcoholism. I mean, this is the last thing you expected to hear on a job panel, but 10% of us are alcoholics, and those 10% affect all the rest of us. And to just be able to spot alcoholism and know it when you see it, because it dresses itself up as something else. It's hard to spot in its earlier stages. We can all spot alcoholism in its chronic severe state, but in its earlier stages, it's very bewildering. And if you can spot that early, it's gonna change your life. You might not marry that person. You might marry someone else. I mean, it could have a huge and lasting and positive impact on you going forward. So that's my sort of unusual advice.
Yeah, both really helpful and very important. So thank you both for sharing. And Erica, we'll finish with your overcoming challenges stories.
Yeah, I would say, okay, I would say that I had practical concerns like financial issues. And then I think mine was a lot along the lines of what both Amy and Naomi have shared, and that is dealing with other people's, coming up as I did, where I did, how I did. I had lots of family and people who would say, oh, you're not going to make it. You're going to, be lonely. You're just going to give up. You're going to come back. You're going to fail. These kinds of obstacles. And then sometimes you can internalize those thoughts and you're like, yeah, what am I? I can't do this. And so I think overcoming just, self-doubt and trusting that I have what I need to do what, is ultimately going to be the work I'm here to do. So I think, putting off self-doubt and also being resourceful. So I had to do a lot of things to be able to financially maneuver until I was able to really be on my own, because I did still have responsibilities to help at home. And so navigating, I think, financially, as well as dealing with your own issues of self-doubt and all of the things that that both Amy and Naomi talked about, those were the same for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate you all sharing at the end some of those hurdles that you've overcome and some really important bits of advice on mental health and handling family adversity and things like that. So really appreciate everything you guys have shared today. Thank you guys so much for being here with us. To our alumni and to our students, we'll follow up with everyone with contact info